Okay, thanks, Jess. All right, let's see. All right, so far so good. What we're going to talk about here today is use of rope access in the wireless industry. My name is Tom Wood. I'm the training manager for Vertical Rescue Solutions by PMI, like the slide says there. I'm also a level 3 rope access supervisor for Sprat, expired IRATA level 1 rope access worker. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of looking at the wireless industry from a slightly different perspective. Typically, it's approached using fall arrest or other means of access, and what we're going to talk about today is the possible benefits of using rope access in the wireless industry. Okay, so thanks for being here. This is going to be about an hour-long presentation, probably a little bit less, depending on how many questions we have there towards the end. So as Jessica said, save your questions up or type them into the chat box if you think of them during the presentation, and she will be the moderator at the end for the questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them. All right, so we're here to talk about two industries, rope access and the wireless industry, which is booming right now. So a lot of people ask me, what exactly is rope access anyway? Looking at this, is this a picture of rope access? No, not necessarily. Window washers, they're typically using what they call a rope descent system, RDS, and they follow a different set of rules than would someone using rope access or typical fall arrest standards. Looking at this, is this rope access? Not necessarily, no. This is rock climbing. When we look at rock climbing, you'll see that the people practicing that sport, they're using a single rope technique and using dynamic rope, which is, of course, different than what we use in rope access or in the tower industry. Recreational climbing gear is not suitable for industrial work at height and hasn't been for quite a while now. And again, they meet a different set of standards, the UIAA standards. Okay, looking at what's going on here, is this rope access? Well, there's ropes there, that's for sure. But is it rope access? No, it's not. Professional rescue, or training for professional rescue, as that picture showed, is different. Rescuers are using a two-rope system, a main and belay line typically, as is used in rope access, but professional rope rescue is addressed by the NFPA, and also it's not necessarily a means of work. It's a means of getting a rescue done, and as we all know, rescue is going to be quite a bit different from working every day on ropes. So we're still trying to figure out what is rope access. Is this rope access? I think we can see what's going to happen here in just a moment. Obviously, this is at a shopping mall in the UK. And obviously, Santa's having some difficulty there. Believe it or not, if you look on YouTube, there are about half a dozen different videos in different countries and different places of Santas rappelling into places and getting their beard stuck. So I don't know if they're going to make this a testable discipline or for rescue of Santas in IRATA or Sprat in the near future, but you can imagine that poor guy hanging there. He's kind of just getting ignored at this point. This was a shopping mall somewhere over in Britain, I believe, and not that long ago. Just for those of you that are curious, what device Santa is actually using there. Santa is not using a device at all. He's using a munter hitch to rappel with. So good thing the British Special Services are just hanging out at the mall at the time. They'll come down and rescue Santa for it. So, you know, if you're looking at rope access in terms of, you know, what's going on here, is this really rope access? No, Santa was coming down on a single rope for one thing, and he was not using what's typically used in rope access, which you're going to find, and that's a controlled rate descender, I'm sorry, a manual descending device. So, of course, happy ending to the story. Thanks to a pair of trauma shears, Santa goes to the ground. So I wouldn't consider that rope access. Now, looking at this, would I call this rope access? Yes, I would. This is rope access. You'll see that he's using a descender that's typically used, an auto-locking bobbin-style descender. There are 2 ropes involved, and actually 4 ropes in this picture because this gentleman is doing a rope-to-rope transfer. So rope access is not new, either to the United States or to Europe or the world at large. Even though it got its start over in the UK, it's been practiced in this country for quite a while. And there are standards out there that address the use of rope access in the workplace. ASTM E2505 is definitely one of those standards. So when people say, does OSHA recognize rope access as a legitimate means of access, they're working on it, but there are several documents out there at the moment that already address rope access, albeit in some rather generic or vague terms. ISO, there's an ISO standard for rope access as well. 22846, Fundamentals and Code of Practice for Rope Access Systems. So that's a worldwide standard for rope access. ANSI Z359, which is, of course, for general industry here in the United States, does address rope access. It defines rope access as a technique using safety ropes, normally incorporating 2 separately secured systems. One is a means of access, and the other is a secondary system used with a harness in combination with other devices for access to and from, as well as suspension at the place of work. We can also look to Sprat, the Society of Professional Rope Access Technicians. In their Safe Work Practices document, they define rope access similarly as a means of access by descending or ascending a main line while the worker is protected by a safety line. Rope access also includes the use of climbing and aid climbing techniques with fall protection. So you'll see that they do include fall protection as part of the definition of rope access. So if we're looking at the use of rope access in the tower industry, can we look at other industries to see how they utilize this as an access tool? You most certainly can. Wind turbine technicians have been using rope access for quite a while based on the difficulty in accessing the blades, some areas of the hubs, and the cell, things like that. Window washers, of course, do use rope access, even though they're not typically covered by Sprat standards for a lot of the work that they do. They're covered by the IWCA and some of the rules set up there for them. But there are some situations where they will be using a rope access system. You'll see folks that do civil, structural, and geotechnical engineering work using rope access quite frequently based on the odd places that they have to get to and some of the dangers associated with that. Getting man lifts and helicopters and things like that are both expensive and not always the safest way to access. You'll find that bridge and dam inspectors and engineers use rope access a lot. For that type of industry, for those type of folks, using rope access is a way to get to the hard to reach nooks and crannies under a bridge or on a suspension bridge up top have proven invaluable and saved a lot of time and definitely increased the profitability of the companies that are using those for that kind of work. You'll see building maintenance workers and engineers also oftentimes doing inspection work, documenting facades on the outside, things like that. They'll be using rope access frequently as well. And of course, one of the places where rope access really got its start early on was in the oil and offshore gas industry. Obviously, with all the bizarre access issues that they have, whether it's in the North Sea off the coast of the UK or down in the Gulf of Mexico, rope access is being used every single day and has been for quite a while. And of course, towers. That's why we're here. Telecommunications. With the recent boom in telecommunications, you're seeing all kinds of towers, all kinds of antennas, and all kinds of maintenance work going on throughout the U.S. right now. So yes, tower workers do use rope access, and here you'll see that they're using rope access as a means to paint this tower. So you can imagine if you were using typical fall arrest methods to paint a tower, it's quite a bit of work getting around on those cross braces, and ropes tend to free everybody up a little bit. And of course, you know, motion picture and theatrical riggers have been using rope access for quite a long time. And yeah, even Clint Eastwood, there's 2 ropes there. He's using rope access. By the way, I don't necessarily recommend pulling out a knife and cutting your main line, even if you are a movie star. So if we take a look at rope access and the way that it's evolved, it didn't start off as its own kind of industry or own kind of means of access. It got its start, as I mentioned earlier, on the offshore oil platforms of the world, especially in the UK. And in doing so, they took gear and techniques and methods of access from from every source imaginable that uses a rope: mountaineering, caving, rock climbing, and of course technical rope rescue. They combined all of those to create a unique system of work using two rope systems. So what I kind of like to tell people when they're asking, well, is this rope access or is that rope access? And kind of a very loose, generic way of looking at it is, if a worker is using two independently anchored ropes and one has their weight on it and one is serving as a safety backup, I would generally consider that to be a rope access system. So what you'll find in the U.S. For the companies that are using rope access techniques, there are two bodies that you'll find in the United States: the Society of Professional Rope Access Technicians, Sprat, and also IRATA, the Industrial Rope Access Trade Association. You'll see they are the two main organizations here in the United States, and I would say Canada as well, that provide certification and evaluations for rope access technicians. Because what I'm going to talk about here is just pulling out a couple ropes and attaching them to a structure and rappelling off doesn't necessarily mean that you're using a safe system of work that's been approved by an organization and you've not been evaluated as an individual using that technique. So I'll talk a little bit more about Sprat than IRATA. I'm a little more familiar with Sprat. I'm a member of Sprat, have been for quite a while. I'm a level 3. And what we found is IRATA is a global organization that does have a presence here in the United States, but at the moment there's a greater concentration of Sprat certified technicians and evaluators that currently call the U.S. home. So just a little bit of background for those that may not know. Sprat was established in the mid-90s with the goal of developing consistency and safe practices for rope access, and also as a way to certify technicians. And I'll get more into that in a little while, but if you look at one of the reasons why rope access has become so successful, I would most definitely credit it mostly to the independent third-party evaluation system that both Sprat and IRATA employ. One of the other goals of Sprat is to do what I'm doing right now, and that's to inform and educate safety professionals and the general public about the benefits of using this means of access. We're also involved heavily in encouraging regulatory acceptance. Several of our members work very diligently with organizations like OSHA or ANSI to get certifications and the acceptance of rope access a little bit more to the forefront of everyone's minds, especially looking at industries that may be interested in using rope access but are hesitant because they have a hard time understanding the ins and outs of the differences between fall protection and rope access, because there are some differences in the eyes of OSHA. And also it's a nonprofit organization. It's not a for-profit entity. So a couple more of the objectives of not just Sprat but IRATA as well. We're interested in keeping rope access viable worldwide in regard to local and national regulations. So what you'll find if you look closely at the guidelines set up by Sprat or IRATA is that we try not to be too country specific. So we're interested in making sure that everyone understands the techniques that they're using are accepted between the industry and then also in their own country based on the regulations that are in place there. The other objective is to support all the members, whether they're a company or an individual. And probably the main goal is to maintain a rope access certification process. And I'll go into that a little bit more, what that actually means here shortly. If you're interested in obtaining any of the documents as far as the Society of Professional Rope Access Technicians is concerned, you can visit the sprat.org website. Anyone can log on to that, and if you're interested in seeing if rope access is a good fit for you or your company, what you can do is download the safe practices for rope access work and also the certification requirements for rope access work from that website. And those guidelines are set up to help companies as well as individuals understand a little bit more about rope access and to serve maybe as a template for companies that are looking to employ rope access as a means of getting the job done. So I'm frequently asked, and I'm sure most people who are certified rope access technicians are asked as well, why should you bother with getting certified from a Sprat evaluator or an IRATA evaluator? There is a cost involved with that, of course, and a lot of folks feel that receiving training is sufficient enough, and they don't believe in bothering with the certification process. Well, you know, as we all know in the safety world, all training is not equal based on what company you get it from, what individual, many things like that. So what we're looking to do is provide an even platform for all technicians to certify themselves to. And so both IRATA and Sprat work very hard to provide impartial evaluation of all candidates. And the reason why that's valuable is it really shouldn't matter who provides the training. Shouldn't really matter at all. If you take the test by an independent evaluator, regardless of who trained you, you should be able to pass. And this ensures a uniform code of practice. This also allows regulatory agencies to reference internationally accepted best practices documents, and that gives them a leg to gives rope access technicians a leg to stand on when the OSHA compliance officer comes knocking. So it's industry best practices that are documented. Another reason why you might want to think about getting a Sprat certification or an IRATA certification for your rope access technicians is that you have to. Anyone, as far as I understand this, now I know it's a convoluted process to find out what are the rules and regulations in New York City for anything, but as best as I've been able to figure out, the Department of Buildings, New York City Department of Buildings, has stated that all persons using individual support lines, and this is mostly when we're talking about buildings, whether you're doing support facade work or rope access work, telecommunications work, if you're outside, you're on a roof, you're on a building, you should either be under the direct supervision of a Sprat or IRATA certified technician, or have your guys that are on the end of the ropes certified. That's what they'd like to see. So you can be sure that if New York City is enacting something like that, it won't be long before other major cities throughout the country follow suit. And in fact, in the state of California, they do address rope access. California is an OSHA state, and even though they don't come out and say you need to be certified by Sprat or IRATA for rope access work that you're performing, if you kind of read in between the lines here with what they're saying and the words that they're using, words like written code of safe practices, things like that, those are things that pretty much point to a larger body, because as you know, it's going to be very difficult for one single company to write an entire code of safe practices for an industry that already has one without seeing the benefit of the certification process. So it's coming down the road. So if we look at just the way that rope access has grown in the United States, we can take a look at a cross-section since 2004, and you can see the year that we began doing certifications and getting that process set up. There was a whole 77 people that were certified that year. And you'll notice no level 3s, because at that time we did not have a process in place to test level 3s or candidates with enough hours that they felt comfortable doing that. It took a couple years for that to happen. But if you look every year since then, all the way up to the last year that we have records for, of course, which was 2012, if you look at the top corner there, you'll see 309 sessions that were held all over the country, and probably a few outside of the country as well, I believe, in Europe. You look at level 1s. Now, there are 3 levels of Sprat, and we'll talk about that in a moment, and IRATA has the same as well. 844 people last year certified, 285 level 2s, and 203. So that brings the total number of certifications just in that 1 year to about 1,332. Now, granted, some of those were recertifications of members who had already been certified. Maybe they moved up from 1 to 2 or things like that. But that encompassed all the numbers for that year as far as I believe I can tell. And if you look in comparison with rope access technicians, also known as RATs, if you like to throw out all the acronyms there, there's a very similar number of rope access technicians plying their trade in the United States right now if you look at the same numbers, same cross-section of tower workers. You know, 3,000 to 4,000 of each. So very similar in nature. Same kind of attitude about work at height, same kind of confidence. But there is one really big difference between, you look at rats and dogs, It's a pretty telling statistic, and I'll get into that in a second. But you know, regardless of who you are, whether you're working on a tower or you're working on a bridge, gravity is still the same. Doesn't matter what country you're in either. As far as I know, it's still the same throughout the world. Falls still are probably the #1 killer of all workers. Here in the U.S., if you look at how many falls there were that were fatal, and back in 2007, and these are the stats from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 357 fatal falls. And the number of those falls that were from height, and I think what they're determining as height being is more than 6 feet, if I'm not mistaken. So 267 of those. So that's 75% of all falls that were fatal, or what falls what they consider from height. So that goes without saying that working at height can be dangerous, and especially if you're doing tower work. So if we look at the statistics that were collected in 2003, there were 15 fatalities, and all the way up into 2006 there were 19. Now if you look at that total number of how many fatalities there are throughout the country and look at those numbers, you say, well, that's not that many. One is more than too much. But if you look at the per capita number, that's when the tower work gets labeled as the most dangerous job in the U.S., and that's when you look at how many guys are actually doing the work, which is a fairly small number, 4, maybe 5,000 tower climbers out there in the U.S. And if you look at that number of maybe 19 fatalities and you look at the per capita, that's pretty high. I don't have that specific figure right here in front of me, but it's high. High enough that consistently tower work is rated among the most dangerous jobs in the country. Now, in contrast, these are the tower dog fatalities, we'll call them, if you want to come down to that level, make it nice and simple for everyone to understand. So that's dogs, and then you look at rats. In the United States, there's never been a recorded fatality of a Sprat or IRATA certified rope access technician working on a rope access job. It's never happened, and I'm knocking on wood, and I hope everyone else is right now too. We want to keep it that way. But looking at the difference between those two types of work, tower workers and rope access workers, why is there such a disparity in these numbers? Well, I think you can trace it back to a lot of different root causes, but I would say that the training, the level of training is the key right there. Before you're a rope access worker, even at level 1, you'll receive 5 days of training typically, and that includes the evaluation. Now, training is not required for the evaluation, but it's very difficult for anyone to pass an evaluation without some training. But typically most companies will do 4 days of training and evaluate on the 5th day. That evaluation on that 5th day, or that last day rather, is an independent third-party evaluator that comes in who's had no connection with the training, and they evaluate the technicians. There's a very strong emphasis on rigging skills, and as workers keep going on rope access, they track their hours in their logbooks. And for instance, if you want to move from a level 1 rope access worker to a level 2 lead technician, you need to have at least 500 hours and 6 months of rope work to move to level 2. And then that's the same from going from level 2 to level 3. There's a very high standard of physical fitness and ability to climb and deal with heights involved with rope access. Just based on the evaluation process alone, it's a very physically demanding endeavor, and just that alone, I don't want to use the word weeds out, but it prevents a lot of folks who maybe have some physical issues. It keeps them from getting doing work at height, and I don't mean that in a bad way. And obviously the safety record it kind of reflects that as well. There's a strict adherence to the JHA, also known in the rope access world as an access work plan. You'll find that most companies that practice rope access on a regular basis, they religiously follow the procedures set up in their JHAs. Another thing that comes up is you won't find a crew of rope access workers who are level 1s out there doing work. They are usually under the supervision of a level 3 rope access supervisor. And there's very obvious differences in people's opinions on what constitutes even on site as far as having a level 3 around. But in a perfect world, every rope access job has a level 3 on site who is setting up that job and overseeing the safety of the job. The redundancy of a 2-rope system is another main reason why the safety record of rope access is so good. When one line fails or one device fails or when someone makes a mistake on one rope, there's another one in place to catch them. And all rope access workers are trained to self-rescue. It's built into their training. So they're built in to do these rescues also from the gear on their harness. There's no running down and getting a rescue kit out of the truck. Even a level 1 rope access technician has the capability to rescue themselves and a coworker if it's a fairly basic rescue, just a rescue from descent. If it's a more advanced rescue, that's why you would want to have the level 3 or maybe the level 2 on site to perform that rescue. A couple of advantages over typical fall arrest when you're thinking about how can rope access be used in the tower industry, where typically fall arrest is the main way of getting around on a structure or a building or a water tank or wherever you want to be putting antennas up. It's a dual rope system. So even though occasionally in tower work you may be rappelling on a single line or maybe have a backup system, a lot of times the backup system that you have, as we all know, those things tend to lock up on you when you're doing controlled descent, and if you're not set up with the gear that you have to do an ascent, you need to get rescued. So that's all built into the way rope access is accomplished. You can ascend, descend, you can move left, you can move right, and again, this is all with just gear that's on your harness and the rigging that's in place. Self-rescue is very easy to do in rope access, and partner rescue is also very easy. There's a lot of techniques that are taught for the rescues as you go up the ranks in both Sprat or IRATA. Things like rescuing people through knots, through deviations. You pick a way that somebody could get stuck, and if you're a level 3 technician supervisor, you should be able to rescue them out of any imaginable scenario. There's a reduced exposure time. Typically, rope access jobs, I've heard, take about 30% less than other means of mechanized access or fall arrest for access. You'll spend more time up front with the rigging, but the job gets done a little quicker. There's a reduced impact on the surroundings. There are fewer lane closures, street closures, things like that, because you don't have to park a big lift in the street there to get access. And again, with machinery, we all know what happens when you don't want it to. It breaks down. So you won't find the mechanical issues involved with rope access. You're maybe a little bit more at the mercy of the weather, but not so much on mechanized devices. There are time savings, which is directly tied, of course, to cost savings. And the other thing about rope access, it's not the only game in town. There's plenty of other ways that you can use rope access in combination with other means of access and get the job done. So if you say you're going to do a job primarily using rope access, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way you can get the job done. You can employ other methods as well, and it works quite well actually with other systems of work. One of the big differences that you'll find with rope access is you'll see that rope access technicians frequently attach short lanyards from their sternal attachment point, which of course in fall arrest is typically a big no-no. If you've got the potential of a more than a 2-foot fall and you're worried about generating more than 900 pounds of force, no one wants you in fall arrest to attach to your sternal attachment point. So that basically means you can only have a 1-foot long lanyard hanging off of your sternal. In rope access, since we're not really doing what would be considered typical fall arrest, we're doing something that's more of a hybrid system of work. And I'll go into where that falls into in a moment. But so there's different forces and different tools and different ways to employ the gear than what you'll find in fall arrest. That being said, it makes it very easy to do a safety check. When you're not having everything hanging off your dorsal attachment point, you can perform self-safety checks much easier. Another issue that's avoided is suspension trauma or suspension intolerance or orthostatic intolerance or whatever you'd like to call it this week. In rope access, since we're hanging off of that sternal attachment point, and self-rescue is so much easier than in fall arrest when you're hanging off of a dorsal attachment point off of a 6-foot long lanyard that you can't climb, you'll find that there's a lot less likelihood of someone becoming exposed to the motionless kind of hanging that you would find with fall arrest when someone takes a fall. There's also a greater interchangeability with different methods of access. You'll find that you can kind of bend some of the rules a bit in regards to rope access being used with, for instance, suspended scaffolding, things like that. So at its heart, what makes rope access, and it's going to be that dual rope system. There's redundancy involved there. There's interchangeability. Rope access workers are trained to transfer from their main line to their safety line and back again and vice versa as part of just a normal level 1 exercise. Of course, the lateral movement that's possible with that. And you can limit swing fall. One of the big things that rope access technicians are tested on during their evaluation is making sure that there's absolutely no swing fall whatsoever and no uncontrolled descents. And the way they accomplish that is with 2 sets of ropes where they'll load 1 set of ropes and then descend across to the other while they're on ascent, and thereby providing 4 points of attachment anytime they're out of the plumb. And like I mentioned before, that 2-rope system, one of the other benefits of that is it allows partner rescue. So you don't need to necessarily string a whole new set of ropes to rescue someone doing rope access. You can use their existing ropes to facilitate the rescue, as long as, of course, those ropes were not damaged in whatever incapacitated that rope access worker. So that's the other really big secret benefit there of having a dual rope system in rope access, that partner rescue becomes much easier. So I asked earlier, where does rope access fall in if it doesn't necessarily fall in with fall protection as far as the loads and the forces and the way to look at the gear? Rope access kind of falls in between restraint and positioning, somewhere in there. So if we look at it in those terms, and that's what we're looking for on a compliance level, of course, as well, it becomes okay to attach certain things to your sternal, where in typical fall arrest you would be prohibited from doing so. So we talked about the levels 1, 2, and 3. Whether you're a Sprat or a IRATA, the levels are similar, slight differences, of course. Just kind of splitting hairs at this point if you're not familiar with either one. But basically, if you look at a level 1 rope access worker, you might think of in your head, if you're used to typical OSHA language, as maybe this being an authorized worker. And I know an evaluator who likes to say that when you get your level 1, that's your learner's permit. That's your ticket to learn. So you are authorized to do work under the direct supervision of a lead technician or supervisor, and just as an authorized person in terms of just general industry and all of that, the authorized worker is expected to have an awareness of a lot of the job site hazards, but they are not supposed to take corrective action. They're supposed to notify a level 2 or level 3 and have them correct the problem. Level 2. This is similar to a competent person you might think of. Not exactly, but fairly close. And they are responsible for doing the lion's share of the rigging and the work on a job site. So they'll have a little bit more time on rope, a little bit more experience, and they will have tested to a higher level as well. Basically, the big difference on the evaluation between a level 1 and a level 2, several more rescue skills, and probably 5 or 6 other testable exercises that they'll have to do over level 1. Level 3. So you might think of this as a qualified person. That wouldn't quite be necessarily true. It's an idea that, this guy's been around for a while, or this gal has been around for a while. They've got a lot of experience on the job and have had at least 2 evaluations probably performed on them. So they are the ones who are responsible for the overall safety of the work site, and their duties might include being the rescue for a job site. They may be in charge of setting up the rigging, things like that. So they're definitely more of a supervisor role, and as such, they need to have a broader knowledge of both rope access and fall arrest techniques and rules and regulations. So it's not limited to rope access with their experience. They should, by level 3, have a broad depth of experience. So if we're looking at Sprat's evaluation system, one of the things that surprises a lot of folks is you're not required to have any training. If you were a rock star and you knew everything and you downloaded both of the PDFs off of the Sprat website, memorized them, and watched a lot of instructional videos on rope access, and you wanted to just walk in and take an evaluation, you can do so in Sprat. But the catch is you probably won't pass. There's a lot of tricks and tips and things like that that you'll pick up in the training that make the evaluation process, which is stressful enough on its own, a lot easier to pass. It's a performance-based evaluation, and there is a written test, and there's also an oral test as well. So it's a 3-part test, written, an oral exam, and then of course the hands-on physical. And it's pretty detailed, very grueling day. Does everyone pass a Sprat evaluation? No, absolutely not. Sometimes it happens that either the individual being tested just has test anxiety. Maybe physically they're too spanked from the whole week in general to complete some of the tasks. And if they're not able to complete any of the, or one of the tasks, that constitutes a failure. So a rough number you might want to think about of how many people don't pass a Sprat evaluation would be around 10%, somewhere in there. Tons of different reasons for that, but this failure rate of, a substantial number of candidates lends a lot of validity to the whole process. It's not just a rubber stamp. It's not just a gimme. It's a very difficult thing to attain. Even level 1 is very difficult to attain if you're not prepared. So what exactly does it look like? This is a time-lapse video that we took of our training facility, I think a couple years ago now. And this is an evaluation day, actually. The guy with the yellow helmet, his name is Steve Davis, dressed in all black there. And he's the evaluator. So what he's doing is walking around and evaluating all of these folks. I believe they were all level 1s. So they're going up, down, across, every other way you can think of. Climbing towers on the right there, you'll see using Fall-Arrest techniques, so they're checked on that. A lot of stuff going on there. So if you're a Sprat evaluator, you kind of have to have ADD to watch all of this and know every single time that there's an unscrewed carabiner, or perhaps if someone isolates themselves onto one rope. That's the quickest way to get a failure, is to isolate yourself on one rope, even for 1 second. That kind of is the end of your day, and unfortunately the end of your week probably, because you'll have to come back and retake the test. You don't have to retake the training, but you have to retake the test. So you can see there's quite a bit of stuff going on there. It's a very physically demanding thing. I've heard some folks say that a week of rope access training is like doing 500 push-ups and 300 sit-ups. So it's a lot. It's a lot, and that's not in one day, of course. That's over the course of the week. So just wanted to include this as kind of just a way for folks to see in their mind what this actually means. There's a lot of ropes hanging there. You need a lot of height. So a couple of requirements as far as what Sprat would like to see if you're a host of a rope access training. Things like, minimum 18-foot ceiling heights and safe environment, well lit, no noise hazards, things like that. So if you are interested in hosting a rope access training and have an evaluator come to your location, you can look at the host application document on the sprat.org website, and that will give you a template and an idea of what's required for that kind of thing to happen. So bring it all back around to the to the wireless industry now. So where does rope access fit into the wireless industry? How can it be used or utilized to its best benefits for the employers? Obviously towers, and I would not consider new construction on towers, of course, a way that you would want to typically employ rope access techniques. But anytime you're doing service work, and especially painting, we see a lot of tower painters that employ rope access techniques. That's very common. Obviously a difficult area to access are smokestacks, and using rope access, it can speed that process up quite a bit, especially if you have a good solid stack that's structurally sound and has some good anchor points on the top. Definitely see the benefit of rope access when you're looking at exterior building mounted antennas. Some of those things are put in locations that if you don't have ropes, you're not going to access them. And having a certification process involved for the people doing that kind of work, and making sure that they're using a 2-rope system and all of that is invaluable. So what are some of the ways that folks use to get around and do this kind of work? Some of the techniques, and these are all, well, I'm sorry, the first one here is a level 1 technique, rope-to-rope transfer. That's when you're going from one set of ropes to another, and you're never, ever not attached to at least your safety line. So if you're moving left and right, you'll be attached to 4 ropes, and then once you come vertical again, you'll be back on 2. But this allows rope access technicians to pretty much reach any area that's in between the 2 sets of anchor points. This is actually a level 2 skill for Sprat, but it's an IRATA level 1 skill. And that's the aid traverse, and that's where you're trying to get out onto a structure safely, maintaining 2 points of attachment, and then being able to get back. That's kind of important. So what you'll see A-traverse is being used for is, especially in theatrical rigging, things like that, where they're trying to get out to a point that's very difficult to reach, bringing slings with them and aiding across, very similar to what you'd see in rock climbing. And then often they'll bring ropes with them so that they can pull their anchors as they go across, and they'll tie pull-through anchors at the end and just simply rappel down from where they needed to get to. Deviation anchors are very common in rope access, so we're just changing the path of the rope. Maybe the area we need to work on is not directly below an anchor point, or maybe there's obstructions in the way or something like that. So this is a very common method of access that's used in rope access. So looking at the industry in general of wireless, you know, what is rope access going to do for you if you're interested in using this as a means of access? It'll help you with your antenna installation and maintenance on existing towers. It will definitely help with tower inspection and repair, of course. If you're looking for the quickest way to inspect a tower, I would imagine from the top down, documenting as you go. Tower painting, of course, I mentioned that earlier. That's kind of a no-brainer on that one. It's messy work and not always a lot of fun, but using rope access will definitely speed up the way that the work is done, especially if you're using the two-rope system, and it's a much safer way than just simply throwing a rope off the top and hoping that it doesn't run across a piece of steel and drop you. Water tanks, which are becoming increasingly popular for cell antennas installations, using rope access to get to some of those, very helpful. And definitely with the rooftop installs that are over parapet walls and things like that. So if you're looking at rope access in the wireless industry, it's really just another tool in your toolbox. It's another way to get the job done. It's not the only way to get the job done, but it's a good way. It's a safe way, and it's a system of work that's gaining acceptance worldwide more each year. And there's more and more people using it. And they're finding out that it's a good way to save money, increase safety, and get the job done a lot quicker. So my boss, Louie, she likes to say that rope access is not an industry unto itself. Wireless is an industry. Rope access is not an industry unto itself. Rope access is more like the truck you drive to get to work. So no one's going to pay you all day long to just rappel and have fun. You actually have to do something when you get to where you're rappelling to, which means you have to have additional skills. You need to be a welder. You need to have RF certifications if you're doing this kind of work on towers. You need to be an electrician. You know, you need to have some sort of certification, whether it's non-destructive testing or anything like that. So again, rope access isn't its own business. It's a way to get other businesses done. So that's what I have on that. At this point, what I would like to do is turn this back over to Jessica, and hopefully everybody's not asleep and they've been paying attention and have lots of questions. So Jessica.
Thank you very much, Tom. And give me just a moment to transfer the screen back over. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into your chat/questions area of your control panel, and we will go over them. Alrighty. So, like I said, any questions you have, go ahead and type them into your chat/questions area of your control panel right now, and we'll go over them as we get to them, as we get them. So we have a few already.
Okay, great.
So the first one is, how does a Sprat certification compare to a competent climber/rescuer course? Okay,
that's a good question. That's what a lot of folks in the tower industry are familiar with, the competent climber/competent rescuer certification. Frequently that's going to be anywhere from a 2 to 4 day class based on who you take it from and all of that. I would say that as far as being comparable, it's not comparable. It's a completely different kind of class. It's a different certification. It's a different level of expertise, and it's kind of, it's not, I wouldn't say it's apples and oranges, but if you're looking at comparing the two, typically a rope access certification, even for level 1, you're going to usually find that it's a 5-day training. whereas, like I said, with the competent climber classes, it's a little bit less. The other thing that you'll find with rope access is there's a lot stronger emphasis on the rigging. The competent climber things are basically focused on fall protection, fall arrest, and using devices or a kit for the rescues, whereas with rope access, all of that stuff is kind of part and parcel with what you're doing every day. There's no dedicated rescue kit necessarily for a rope access technician. Their rescue kit is on their harness. They are using, a lot of the same gear in regards to some of the ropes that they're using. Obviously, full body harnesses and helmets and things like that. But I would say the main difference is the level of intensity and focus on rigging in a rope access course versus a competent climber course.
Okay. The next one is, what type of work constitutes the qualification hours needed to move up in the levels?
That question gets asked probably more than any question at all. There is, in both IRATA and Sprat, there is a procedure in place if you wanted to do what they call a direct entry. So if you're someone who has a lot of experience doing rope access work but you've never been certified, or maybe you're certified in another country to their standards for rope access, for instance, New Zealand has their own, Australia has their own, Germany has its own, and you want to do a direct entry into a higher level, you can certainly do that. And what they're going to look at as far as hours or experience that would count is they want to see that you have a breadth of experience and not just in going up and down, for instance. They want to see that you've spent some hours doing rigging, some hours that you've spent doing aid traverses or rope-to-rope transfers or things like that. But what they're looking for is they want to see that you have rope access work experience. For instance, when I became a direct entry level 2 Sprat, I had been working and doing mountain rescue and teaching a lot of mountain rescue to our new members for more than 10 years, and I could not count any of that. Even though for some of our systems we were using a 2-rope system, it wasn't necessarily rope access work. We were doing mountain rescue work using a couple ropes. So for instance, I hear a lot of guys that are firefighters and they ask, well, can my training as a firefighter doing rope work, rope rescue, count? Some of it can count, most certainly, but what they're looking for is basically that you've gotten paid or done work for a company that does what we would call classic rope access and 2-rope system, doing work, not just one thing. So it's a very complicated question. It's one that we're trying to get rid of the ambiguity in that what defines rope access work in the certification process and what counts in the logbook. In the past, we've been a little bit more liberal with what we'll accept as far as experience, but they've been tightening down a little bit more because we're finding a lot of folks have experience, plenty of the hours, but the hours are only in one discipline or one thing. For instance, they were a window washer with 1,000 hours, but really what they had was 1 hour of experience that they used 1,000 times, and that was 1 hour to learn how to go down a rope, and then that's it. So they're looking at more closely at the logbooks now and trying to establish a broader level of experience in the people applying for direct entries. So I know that's a very long, rambling answer to that question, but it's one that even in Sprat we're still struggling with it at the moment.
Okay. The next one is, do I have to have a level 3 technician on a rope access job?
Depends on who you ask, but if you're following if you're interested in protecting your company from liability, or you're not willing to accept a lot of liability for things that maybe you've decided suit only your company, if you're employing Sprat or IRATA certified technicians and you're following the Sprat Safe Work Practices document and following that as best as possible, you would always have a level 2 or level 3 supervisor or lead technician on site for every rope access job. That being said, everyone knows that it's kind of difficult to get to a level 3 and sometimes a level 2 because companies do lots of other work besides rope access out there, so it's difficult for them to get the hours. So what you'll find is a lot of companies recently have moved towards hiring an independent level 3 from another company. They come on, set up the job site, they're there long enough to help run the job, and when that job is over, they're no longer they're helping, they're doing other work. So they're basically looked at as subcontractors for level 3 that they're hiring out from other companies. So hopefully the way that it works is your guys start building up hours and eventually can move up the ladder there and get to the level 2 and level 3 so that you do have those in-house on-site level 3 technicians or level 2 technicians there. So it's a goal at the end of the day. We're not there yet, of course, but it does provide quite a bit more assurance of a safe work site when you have a level 2 or a level 3 there.
Great. And it looks like we have one more question. It's, does rope access work pay well?
Well, I'd mentioned that nobody pays you to go up and down the rope and rappel all day. Maybe there is somebody, I don't know, but I've never heard of them. You have to have another skill, and of course, based on what, how in demand your skill is or how rare that skill is, that will certainly dictate your pay. You know, I would say that a guy who's, you know, an 18-year-old kid out of high school who, and that's the minimum age of being certified, by the way, is 18, who gets hired on for a window washing company, for instance, as a level 1, they're probably not going to be making as much money as somebody who's, you know, a level 3 certified NDT engineer, for instance. But I would generally say that most companies, if you're starting off at the bottom of the barrel there, the pay varies wildly. I would say anywhere between $15 or $16 an hour all the way up to $50 an hour or more if you have a very specialized skill. So there's quite a range in the pay there, of course, but one of the things that as a trainer that I find is that very rarely does someone come out of a class who doesn't have a job in rope access when they go into the class, leave the class, and remain unemployed for very long if they want to work. There's a lot of demand for rope access technicians out there right now, and if anybody's willing to travel and willing to move up the food chain, so to speak, going from level 1 to 2 to 3, you'll find that there's as much work as you probably want to have.
Okay, great. And we actually, oh, actually, we had another question, but you just answered it, so.
Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
2 for 1.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and get them in real quick if you want to. Otherwise, we can get them via email later, which I will show you how to do. But I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. So if you do have any questions that we didn't get to here or you think of later, you can email Tom at twood@pmirope.com. And there'll also be a link on our website to email him. And the PMI webinar series hosts webinars frequently, so if you keep an eye on our website, you can see future dates and topics. And on the same lines, if you want to get updated automatically on those dates and topics, as well as all kinds of other things that PMI is up to, you can sign up for our e-newsletter. You can follow us on Twitter and also on Facebook, and those addresses are all shown at the bottom of your screen. So we don't have any other questions, so we'll go ahead and end it, and thank you very much for attending. We hope that it was helpful, and thanks, Tom, for doing it.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks, everyone, for attending.
Have a great day, everyone.